Alright, in this video, now that we have our object inside of ZBrush, we're going to take a look at how we can actually start doing some sculpting on this object. So here inside of ZBrush, let's talk about navigation first. So we already talked about in the last video that you can click and drag in the open viewport, and that's going to let you rotate around. So if you just drag left and right, up and down, you can see how you can tumble the object. Now if you hold down Alt and click anywhere in the open viewport, you're going to be able to pan this object around like this. So get a little bit familiar with rotating around and holding down Alt as an alternative to move this back and forth. Now if you want to zoom, we can hold down Control and we can right click and we can move the mouse up and down, and that's going to give us zoom. So my suggestion would be take just a little bit of time, click and drag in the open viewport, hold down Alt and then Control right click to zoom in and out, and get familiar with moving around your object. Something else that you can do is just tap F, and that will frame whatever the object is, and it'll frame it the best that it can within the screen. Okay, now that you know something about navigation, let's take a look at how we can take these different parts that we have and turn this into a solid model. Because what we imported in from Maya is actually, this board is kind of seen as a separate piece, and this is seen as a separate piece, and if we started to sculpt on those things, you could sculpt on them, and I'm just going to put on the standard brush and then sculpt along these things here. Let me just push this here like this, and I'm actually having an effect on this, but it's just very, very slight, a very light effect. We want these things to be combined together just to make it feel as if it's one kind of piece and one kind of object. So what I'm going to do is use a process called Dynamesh. ZBrush has got this in the area of geometry, so if we drag up and we go to geometry, we can see that there's an area within geometry called Dynamesh. So we can open that up and just click, and there's a resolution to this. So it's going to look at the bounding box of whatever this object is, how big it is, and kind of divide it into these little cells, or these little kind of cubes, and this is kind of the resolution where it builds new topology for this. So you can see if we just leave it at 128 and click Dynamesh, it's going to go through this process of converting it over. And if I turn on the polyframe, you can see the actual geometry that it created for this. So I think for this object it's a bit too low, right? It doesn't look quite so good. It's kind of pixelated kind of look to it. So let's hit undo. We're just going to hit Control Z, and you can see that ZBrush gives you this undo history right up here, so we can click and drag that. That's kind of a neat feature. To work this out, we can kind of keep going with this and kind of figure out, the next thing I would do is probably take this all the way up to maybe 256 and go somewhere there and click Dynamesh. Again, it's going to go through the process trying to evaluate the object and try to do the best job that it can to build this new kind of topology for it. Still feels a little bit low to me. I'm going to hit undo, and we'll go and put this up to, let's try 400, and click Dynamesh again. And once we find this number, we'll know that we've got a pretty good number to kind of work with, and probably don't need to do this too much. You did see a shift in my screen, so whenever ZBrush starts to use a lot more of your processing power, you might notice that the screen kind of does this kind of screenshot kind of effect really kind of quick. And I think we're going to turn on the polyframe and take a look, and so you can see the geometry here. I'm going to hold down Control and then right click to kind of zoom in on this. And you can see, I think that's going to give us something decent to sculpt with. Now, I was sculpting with the standard brush before, and you can see the type of effect that we have, and it's pretty extreme. What was going on before was that if I went all the way back to the point that we have this imported in, if we look at the polyframe for this, there's really not very much to actually sculpt on. So I could sculpt on these pieces here, and it would actually move it along. But as I was sculpting on these boards, there's no vertices or anything to kind of move around. So I'm going to hit undo for that, and then I'll actually put this back here. This is one of the things about the undo history that you should know about. I drug the undo history back, did some operation on it, and it basically kills anything that's in front of it. So it erases the forward time. As you've gone back in time and kind of done an operation on it, then it kind of erases everything in front of it and acts like, okay, this is where you want to go back in time and start from there. So I'm just going to click this Dynamesh button again. We'll put that resolution back to about 400 and click that, and you can see this is what this will give us for the Dynamesh resolution. As soon as it runs through its process, it converts it over. And then once that's done, I'm going to do the same operation to the top of the crate. So I just opened up the subtool area. If geometry is open, you can open and close these just by clicking. And again, if this is open, you can drag this thing around just like that. So I'll go to subtool, and this one's selected. So you can see in ZBrush, this is what it's showing for a subtool. This one's highlighted and actually visible for the icon there. If I click the top crate, you can turn off the visibility of other subtools like that. So you can see with the polyframe on, it's actually showing me that this part's highlighted. I'm just going to click and drag here. We'll tap F to frame it on here, and then maybe Control right click to kind of zoom out just a little bit, just so we can get a better kind of look on this thing. So now we're going to go and open up that geometry area again. And if you want to have something like subtool open at the same time geometry is open, they give you the ability, if you hold down Shift and click on this name, you can have two things open at the same time. So just something to kind of keep in mind about their interface that they have. So we'll put the resolution on this to 400 like this, and then click Dynamesh, and we'll have it build the mesh for us on there like that. I'm going to turn the polyframe off, and I'm going to show you a tool that exists right above Dynamesh that's kind of cool, and it's called Clay Polish. If you just click that and you run it a few times, it kind of does this kind of a smoothing algorithm on things, but highlights kind of edges. So I kind of like the look of this that it kind of produces. It builds a mask on here, and we're not going to get too in depth about masking or things like that, but in ZBrush you can hold down Control and you can paint a mask directly on the object, and if you hold down Control and Alt, you can paint a mask out. So it is putting a mask on here. We can get rid of a mask by holding down Control and dragging it in the open viewport, and that will get rid of the mask that we have for this here. So to select different subtools, we can be in the subtool area, and you can either click on it like this. That's one way of selecting subtools. The other way that you can select subtools is just hold down Alt and actually click on the object itself in the viewport, and that will allow you to select those things. I'm going to hold down Alt and click and drag up like this, and then just click and drag in the open viewport and just kind of reposition this object so I can kind of look at this a little bit better. We're going to go back down to the geometry area, and we're going to use this clay polish and just hit clay polish maybe twice, something like that, and we're going to get rid of that mask. You can see the mask is being built up on there. Hold down Control and just drag a marquee in the open viewport like that. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to talk to you about is brushes. And with inside of ZBrush, if you tap B, you're going to have a bunch of different brushes that you can use, and they're all in alphabetical order. And if you know the brush that you're kind of looking for, it's pretty easy to find. If I was going to use something like the Trim Dynamic, and that's one that I want you to kind of take a look at, you can hit T for that, and it'll limit all the different brushes that you have that start with that. And then you can see there's a hotkey associated with each one of those. So if you hit the hotkey of D on there, that would actually do Trim Dynamic, but we can click on the icon as well. So I'm going to be using a mouse for this because I'm just going to expect that maybe you don't have a tablet. Now you can use a mouse with this. This brush will take a look at the object and look at the orientation of it and kind of start to chip away at things. I don't want my brush quite so large, so I can hold down S and click and drag. I can make my brush size a bit smaller, like you see here, like this. And we can also control the strength. So now as the brush is smaller, I might be able to just run it along through here just a little bit like this. Now it feels kind of chunky, and I'm not really liking the way that this kind of looks. What I'm going to show you is under the stroke menu, if we take stroke and just click here, take this little kind of powerish icon, click and drag over in here and dock it. And remember, you can open and close this trough area by clicking these arrows. So we've got the stroke within here, and if we open up lazy mouse, we can turn on lazy mouse. And what I like to do is maybe you have our lazy step really, really low. You can put that down to 0. Maybe put the lazy smooth something like 10. And the radius for this, maybe I'll do something like 30 or so. This lets you click and drag, and it's going to build a line that kind of follows your brush stroke. Let's drag this up a little bit higher, maybe to something like 50, and I'll hold down S and make my brush size a bit larger, kind of like something like that. Now as I click and drag, I'm getting some better results that I think are working pretty good for me. And this is where you would start to use your artistic eye to kind of move around on the object and start to build up some things. I'm just trying to make it feel like the wood is kind of maybe beat up a little bit, and kind of some of these edges are kind of worn, kind of like this. And you can tell, like, if you hold down S and make your brush size larger, the larger your brush is, it might have quite a bit of a different effect. So I'm going to hit undo to get rid of that stroke that I had here. Shift Z will do forward in history kind of thing right there like that. I'm going to make my brush size just a bit smaller, and then just kind of drag along through here. So I was using S to do the draw size, and it actually exists up in here too. So you can use this as a slider, and this is the intensity, how intense the brush is. So you can make it a bit more intense or lessen depending on what you're trying to do here. So I'm going to hold down S, make my brush size just a bit larger, and kind of run it through here like this. And I would work my way around the entire object like this. So I think that's going to give you some nice kind of details. The next thing I want to do is show you how to use a different brush that would allow you to build some kind of wood grain and kind of line work on here. So we're going to do something pretty similar to what we did with this brush. I'm going to use the Dynamesh standard brush. This is my custom interface. And again, to get to the brushes, we can either go up here and click, or we can tap B and bring our brushes up. So I'm going to use the Dynamesh standard brush. So we're going to tap D to limit our brushes, and then we're going to be able to see on here, you can hit hotkey S for that, or you can just click on here and say Dynamesh standard. Now I already have the stroke palette open. We've got our lazy mouse turned on. I'm going to turn the lazy steps down really low, and we'll put the lazy smooth up to about 10 and the radius maybe to about 30 or 40, somewhere in that vicinity. Now I'm going to click and drag out and see what this line produces for me. I'm going to undo. It's pretty darn strong, so I'm going to take the intensity and drop the intensity down pretty low to maybe 8 or so. Let's try a little bit higher. So we got to find what's that sweet spot for us. And I think that's looking pretty good. I want to make my brush size just a little bit smaller. So sometimes to find, like I said, to find that sweet spot for what you're looking for, you might have to change the brush controls just a little bit. And so I'm just going to kind of drag through here every now and then. Now the other thing is, as I start to add this detail, I'm going to hit undo until I get these strokes back out of here. The resolution that we were working at worked okay for these trim dynamic pieces, but now I'm starting to notice I would like a little bit more geometry, because you see how this looks kind of chunky a little bit. We can get that to look a little bit better. We have to go to the geometry area again under the tools section, and we're going to go to Dynamesh and take our resolution and put this up to like 550. Let's go around there. Now to remesh this thing, to build new topology, we hold down Control, drag in the open viewport, and it will remesh. Now if you have a mask on here, let me show you what happens with this. If you want to remesh, you have to hold down Control and drag in the open viewport, and you remember that gets rid of our mask. And then you have to hold down Control and drag in the open viewport, and it'll remesh again. So we can always turn on our polyframe, kind of look at the results of that. But the real test is going to be just drawing on this. So you can see how that line is much smoother. It's looking quite a bit better for the resolution. Now the intensity of my brush, I maybe want to drop that back just a little bit. So I got an intensity of 10. So here we go. I can start to draw at some of these lines. And like I said, what would be good is to start using your artistic eye for this. You could potentially go out and get some examples, some visual examples. This is kind of cool about the program. You can click the see-through for this. So if you had an image up on the internet back behind there for what would look like, you could just slide that pretty quickly to kind of look back and forth between the programs. So I'm just going to kind of paint this out just a little bit more. And I'm not going to do too much. And I will show you this. If I wanted to go back to the Trim Dynamic brush, if we tap B, Trim Dynamic should be up here pretty close to the top of some of our last brushes that we used. And it should hold the settings that we had, so we can just kind of run through this just a little bit more like this. Just kind of beat up those edges a bit more like that. And again, it's up to you to kind of tell the story of this object for how much wear and tear is kind of built up on this thing. The other thing I could do is we could close up Dynamesh and go back to clay polish, and we could run that clay polish maybe again at the very end after we're done, and you can kind of see the look that we have on there. So I'm going to hit undo. I think it maybe polished it a bit too much. I was going to see about there's a sharpen factor on there. Let's see what happens if I kind of put that on for sharpen. So it's got maybe a little bit more of that detail in there, and that looks pretty cool. So you can see from what we had before to something like what we've got going on right now, and we'd have to run through and work on the entire object. One last thing about navigation: as you're rotating around, if you want to snap to a different view, you can hold down Shift as you're rotating, and it'll snap to like a front or a side or a top. And also you can actually turn on and off perspective. So you can tap P to turn on and off perspective. So if you want an orthographic view, you can tap P to turn off perspective that you see here, and you can rotate it around and then hold down Shift, and you can snap to a front view and a side view and a top view. What I usually do is kind of rotate it and get it close into space, and then hold down Shift, and then just have it snap, and then you can turn on and off that perspective. So this should give you all the different tools that you need to get inside a ZBrush and do a little bit of sculpting and add a little bit of aging to your object that you see here. So one last thing to talk about before we finish this video up is actually saving your file. So you can save your entire project file, and this will give you your sculpt, everything that you need. If you go to File and you can have Undo History, it'll actually save the undo history. And I would caution you that this makes your file sizes quite a bit larger, but if you're pretty easy into the beginning stages and you want to save some of the sculpting decisions that you have, you can do the undo history, and you can just say Save As, and you can go ahead and save that and give it a name like this. And the next time that you open up ZBrush, so let's just do this. I'm going to hit the command key and do the Dynamesh Sphere. And like we're in a new project here, if we want to just load this up, we can just say File, Open, and I'm going to find the file that I just saved. It's going to load it up, and it actually has all the undo history that you have here. Again, just watch out for the file size and just take note of that. But other than that, it's a great way to save your project with everything that you need for the materials and setup and everything else like that, and actually save some of the sculpting decisions that you've made throughout the duration of the project.